Guys, Ryan here at Signature Edits, and inside this Lightroom quick trick, I'm going to show you two awesome ways you can use the Texture tool in Lightroom to enhance your images and give them extra impact. Let's do it. Alright, so you can find the Texture tool inside of Lightroom in your Develop module right over here in this very top panel, and you can see that it's basically doing what it says. It adds texture or takes away texture in your image. But how does it work, and what's the difference between that and clarity and dehaze and sharpening? Okay, I'm glad you asked. Dehaze, well, we're not going to get into that too much, but just suffice it to say that it's really aimed towards adding contrast back to your image or taking it away if there's too much contrast. Most of the time you're just adding it if, for example, you have a lens flare going on and things are just too hazy. Well, that's what you use. Clarity, on the other hand, is going to enhance lines of contrast. So let's start by just brightening this image a little bit, adding a basic preset here. Okay, that's looking fine, close enough. We zoom in and look at the shadow between these two fingers, all right? Clarity is going to look for lines of contrast, so this shadow versus the brightness of her finger, and it's going to enhance that both by making the brighter parts brighter, the darker parts darker, the saturated parts more saturated, the less saturated parts less saturated. It's enhancing everything in every way. It's very extreme. So that's what I really want to get across. As I bring up the contrast, you're going to see the darks in between the fingers are getting darker, and the lights in her fingers are getting brighter. Likewise, it's also decreasing the saturation in her fingers and adding saturation elsewhere where it thinks there already is, okay? So obviously, that is going to look very, very overdone, over-edited, whereas we take up the texture, it's going to be a lot more subtle. Now, how do we use this practically? What are some tools? The first thing that I want to show you is what you can do with the texture brush if your image is slightly out of focus. So for example, her left eye is, well, I guess it's her right eye is mostly in focus here, but the right really isn't at all. So let's say we were just trying to correct something like that. And this is the first tip I have for you, and it's what I find is the most helpful thing I do with the texture brush. I use this all the time. If my image is slightly out of focus, I just take the texture brush, and I take that texture up, and bam, her eye more or less looks pretty darn close, right? Now, this might not be a perfect job, but let's just compare it to if we were to use the clarity, for example, and try and do the same thing. So here's clarity, right? It's making it way too dark and squishy and weird, and it would never work. You could maybe do it more subtly, but then you can hardly even make a difference. Here's before and after clarity. So there is some progress, but really we're not fixing the sharpening issue. We could also try and take the sharpness up, but because our photo wasn't sharp to begin with on the eye, it's really just going to bring out more noise and not really do a very good job. Again, here's before sharpening and after sharpening, hardly any difference at all. Now, if we take the texture brush, however, and we drag that sucker up, you can see that without it looking super affected, it's not looking like we've done a whole lot, but it is way sharper. It's brought out detail that would have been completely lost. And I'm finding this is rescuing me all the time inside of Lightroom when I have a photo that I love the photo, but it's out of focus, or one person is out of focus in a portrait or something like that. That is an amazing tool. Just giving you another example, here is a recent shoot that I did at an engagement party, and you can see this couple, the gentleman on the right here just isn't in focus. Now, if I were to brush on his face with some clarity, you can see how horrendous this looks. It's really not going to fix the problem. Even if I dial it back, it looks overdone. And previously, that's about all I could do, because sharpness isn't going to sharpen something that was never sharp to begin with. You can see it's just kind of exaggerating the noise in the photo. Now, if I take the texture up, however, you can see that, wow, all of this detail that really wasn't in his face is now being added back. It's like we have this magic sharpening tool that can rescue us when we miss focus. So here is before, and here is after. As you can see, it's a crazy amount of detail that we're recovering, something we wouldn't have been able to do without this texture brush. Okay, so let me show you another way that we can use this. First, I'm going to just add it to both eyes. Something like that. And I'm going to do a little trick here, lower the contrast a little bit, and raise the whites. Not a whole ton, but just a little. And that's going to add a little bit of pop to this area of the image, right? So see how much her eyes are popping now that we've done that. Now you always want to zoom out. That might be way too intense when we actually look at it in context. But look at how much texture, obviously, and sharpening we've added to her eyes. In fact, this eye, pre-adding that adjustment, looks pretty much unsharp, really. It's not even in focus compared to afterwards. So it's very, very powerful. Now, what are some other ways that we can use this? Obviously, we can use it for softening skin. Kind of the opposite of what you'd think. Adding texture, we can also take away texture, which is softening, right? So we can zoom in 1:1 or 2:1 on her face here. And because this image was also already kind of out of focus on her skin, we don't have a lot of imperfections. She has beautiful, nice skin, so this isn't going to be as exaggerated. But let's say that you had more unflattering light on a portrait, you had more lines underneath the eyes or wrinkles, whatever it is. This can be a super powerful tool. We're just going to reset our brush here, take the texture down, and I'll just really exaggerate it so you see what I'm doing here. And we'll just brush everywhere that we don't want to keep the texture. So all the imperfections in her skin, we can take care of really, really easily. Super, super handy. Now that might have been obvious to you. You might have been like, oh, show me something new, show me something more significant. Well, have you ever thought about the fact that you can maybe use this over the entire background of an image to make your subject pop even more? So for example, we can go to our global adjustments on the entire image and take our texture down on everything. Okay, now we're going to go back to our adjustment brush and we're going to add in the texture that we just took away from our subjects. We're just going to paint really roughly here for the sake of time. And you can see that it doesn't look like we're over editing her because all we're doing is just kind of canceling out that first effect, all right? So go ahead, paint that on. And now let's make a virtual copy so we can see the difference between before and after. So I'm going to delete this brush and I will reset my texture adjustment. And now you can look at the background and the separation between the subject and the background between this photo and this photo. All right, so it was pretty subtle, so let me show you again in case you missed it. Watch this bench area behind her. If I go to photo number 1, and now after we take away the texture from the background, you see how much of a jump there is in the background? How it really just makes it so much more creamy and nice to look at. That's the kind of difference you can get with this texture brush in a really, really subtle and easy to apply way. Now, this particular photo, there was already great separation between the subject and the background. I would expect that this effect would be even more exaggerated in other situations where you don't have that kind of depth of field going on already. So that's how you can use the texture brush to enhance your photos. You can really clean up skin by lowering the texture and just softening that skin, removing wrinkles. You can also use it to get texture back and sharpening back in areas of your image that perhaps weren't sharp to begin with. So for example, we'll reset this, add our texture, and try and get some sharpening back in this hair that was out of focus. Perfect. And places that I would add this is obviously the eyes, the eyebrows. We'll add that there. Maybe even on points of contrast around her nose, for example, if we want that line to stand out. That was too much, so we won't do that. And lips, definitely do it on lips. It'll be really, really great on there. So stuff like that, it's really, really handy as a tool, and I hope that this kind of gives you some ideas of where you can use the texture brush in your own photography. Obviously, it has a lot to offer. So if this video was helpful for you, do me a big favor, hit that like button for me, make sure to subscribe for future content, tutorials, and resources, and leave me a comment below. Do you see this tool being helpful for you? How are you using it in your photography? Do you have different techniques that I haven't shown you here today? I'd love to hear about them. All right, I will catch you in the next video.